Hello. These are my audience members for this speech. All right. So, the topic that I chose to pick to do my informative speech on would be the history of doping in sports, as well as the consequences and the measures that these sports organizations have put into place to ensure that these don't continue to happen. So I believe that all athletes at any level of competition after high school should be required to submit urine or blood samples to ensure that they are clean and not trying to cheat the system. And for my visual representation today, I chose to use a bottle of steroids that I was prescribed after my surgery. These aren't actual steroids that athletes would take to try to get a competitive edge, but in the sense they are steroids. Now, two of the most famous athletes to ever bring steroids into the pop culture were Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, who in 1998 were in a very historic home run race to try to break Roger Maris's home run record. The first known athlete to get caught using steroids was actually a British cyclist named Tom Simpson. He actually ended up dying from his use of steroids during the Tour de France in 1967. After they did an autopsy on his body, it was revealed that he had died from dehydration and that there were steroids found in his system, which they believed were a correlation with his death. Now, the consequence of getting caught using steroids can vary from sport to sport. In the MLB, which is probably the most strict when they suspend their athletes that are caught with steroids, the first time an MLB athlete is caught using steroids, they get an 80-game suspension. Then the second time they're caught using steroids, they get a full season, which is 162 games. And then the third time they were caught, they get a lifetime ban. Now, the NFL, for example, they're a little less strict when it comes to steroids. The first-time offenders are 4 to 6 games, depending on what type of steroid. It's kind of up to the judge at that point. And then the second time they were caught, they can face a 10 to 12 game suspension. And then the third time, they can get a lifetime suspension. Now, a company like the UFC, they do their suspension case by case. And as bad as it sounds, I think that they choose to give suspension to their athletes that are caught based on how popular they are and how much money they can bring to the sport. For an example, Sean O'Malley, who is one of the most famous athletes in the UFC right now, he was caught with steroids back in 2017, and he got a 2-year suspension, while at the same time, Nick Diaz, who was caught, he got a 5-year suspension. So they kind of play it by case to determine on how long someone faces a suspension. The last thing I'd like to talk about are the anti-doping measures that these companies have put into place to ensure this. The UFC, for example, they used USADA for the longest time. They actually ended their partnership with them at the beginning of this year. But USADA was a company who, no matter where you lived in the world, they would show up to your house at any time of the day, any time during the year, and they would ask for a drug test from you. And if you refused, then you would not be able to compete in whatever sport you were participating in. And after USADA was introduced to the UFC, it seemed to really help with the athletes that were on steroids. For example, there was an athlete named Vitor Belfort who famously had been speculated that he had used steroids. And once USADA was brought into action, his physical appearance changed drastically, as well as his performance in the cage. So in conclusion today, I wanted to talk about doping in sports, what it can do for your career, how it can play a negative role, and what these sports are doing now to try to prevent these measures to make sure their sport is as clean as possible. Thank you. And here's my 3 members again. Thank you.